Long before anyone in Bellweather Pass began calling Morrowglass Lodge a place of refuge, it had been a promise made by a tired man to the daughter who had followed him into the mountains. Elowen Rusk made that promise in the spring of 1868, when the High Valley was still unnamed on most territorial maps, and the nearest settlement consisted of 3 cabins, a smithy, and a trading shed beside a muddy wagon road. He had arrived with a broad-backed mule, a chest of carpenter's tools, and 12-year-old Elowen walking beside him because the trail was too steep for both of them to ride. Ansel had once built houses in Ohio. He had framed barns, repaired churches, and raised roofs for men who shook his hand at the end of the day and sometimes paid him what they owed. After his wife died of fever, the rooms he had built for other families began to feel like accusations. He sold what little remained, loaded his tools, and took Elowen west. He told her they were searching for clean air. Years later, Elowen understood that her father had really been searching for a place where grief could not find him. They discovered the valley after losing the main trail in an early snow. The land sat beneath a ring of dark ridges, with a narrow river winding through spruce forest and open meadow. A weathered trapper's cabin leaned beside the water. Its chimney had collapsed, half the roof was missing, and a black bear had torn apart one wall in search of flour or salt. Ansel stood in the snow, studying the ruin. "We can fix that," he said. Elowen looked at the broken roof, the sagging door, and the mountains rising like walls around them. "We could also freeze to death. That would delay the work." She laughed, and it was the first time he had heard the sound since her mother's funeral. They repaired the cabin, then they enlarged it. Ansel built a stable, a smokehouse, and a proper kitchen with a stone hearth. When prospectors began crossing the pass, they stopped for food, dry blankets, and news of the weather. Wagon drivers paid for beds, hunters traded meat for supplies, surveyors left coins on the table, and names carved into the railings. The cabin became a lodge. Ansel called it Morrowglass, because at dawn the mountain lake above the valley reflected the sky so clearly that it seemed to hold the coming day beneath its surface. Elowen grew up among timber, weather, and strangers. She learned to read the clouds before she learned long division. She could judge the weight of a snowpack by the sound beneath her boots. She knew how to reset a slipped horseshoe, splint a broken finger, preserve venison, mend harness leather, and pack a chimney crack with clay before sparks reached the roof. She also learned what people decided about her before she spoke. By 16, Elowen was already larger than most women in Bellweather Pass. By 20, she had broad shoulders, powerful arms, heavy hips, and a round face framed by dark auburn hair. Her body was soft in some places and solid in others, shaped by inheritance, hard labor, and the meals she ate after working from before dawn until well after dark. Travelers often assumed she was slow. Men offered to carry buckets she had already hauled farther than they could walk. Women lowered their voices when discussing marriage near her, as though Elowen's size had made her deaf as well as undesirable. Shopkeepers looked surprised when she calculated accounts faster than they did. Drunks mistook her quietness for timidity until she lifted them by the coat and set them outside. Ansel never treated her as fragile. "People see what saves them the trouble of thinking," he once told her. "Let them be lazy. You don't have to join them." For years, father and daughter ran Morrowglass Lodge together. They worked through blizzards, spring floods, lean summers, and the fever season of 1877, when every bed held a sick miner, and Elowen slept on the kitchen floor because she had given her room to a mother with 2 children. Then silver was discovered north of Bellweather Pass. The town changed almost overnight. Saloons appeared beside the general store. Freight wagons crowded the road. Men arrived with drills, ledgers, rifles, claims, and ambitions larger than the mountains. The mayor's office, once an unpaid post, held by whichever shopkeeper had the patience for it, became a position worth purchasing. Land that had been ignored for decades suddenly required surveys, deeds, seals, and fees. Orrin Vale arrived during that transformation. He wore tailored coats beneath expensive buffalo robes and traveled with men who called him Sir, even when he was not present. His company, Vale Consolidated Mining, purchased several small claims, then absorbed competing operations after accidents, debts, and legal disputes. He built a crushing mill east of town and paid enough wages to make half the county dependent on his approval. Vale visited Morrowglass Lodge for the first time in 1881. He sat near the hearth with Ansel, drinking coffee he criticized, and asking questions he pretended were casual. How much land belonged to the lodge? Where did the northern ridge begin? Had Ansel ever found mineral traces near the creek? Did the original deed include subsurface rights? Ansel answered carefully. After Vale left, Elowen found her father standing at the window, watching the company men ride down the valley. "He wants something," she said. "He always wants something. What does he want here?" Ansel looked toward the floor, as though he could see through the pine boards and stone foundation into the earth beneath them. "I'm not certain yet." That uncertainty lasted almost 2 years. Ansel began spending evenings over maps and records. He rode to the Territorial Land Office twice, returning angry after the first trip and silent after the second. He copied documents by lamplight, sealed letters, and hid papers in places Elowen did not know. She asked him what troubled him. He told her only that men like Vale relied upon everyone else becoming too frightened, too tired, or too confused to challenge them. Then, in October of 1883, Ansel Rusk died on the Northern Trail. Marshal Corrin said his horse had thrown him. Dr. Eamon Say examined the body and declared that Ansel had struck his head against a rock. Mayor Alden Price expressed public sorrow, praised Ansel as a pioneer, and encouraged Elowen to sell the lodge while there were still generous buyers. Elowen did not believe the horse had thrown him. Ansel had ridden that trail for 15 years. His mare returned with a cut bridle strap, not a broken one. Mud covered the back of Ansel's coat, but his boots were clean. There were bruises around one wrist that looked like the marks of a rope or a hand. She confronted Dr. Say. He told her grief sometimes created questions where none existed. She confronted Marshal Corrin. He advised her not to accuse respectable men without evidence. She confronted Mayor Price. He smiled with the patience of a man speaking to an unreasonable child. Elowen buried her father on a rise overlooking the lodge. After the mourners left, she remained beside the grave until the first snow began falling through the trees. Then she returned to the kitchen, tied on her apron, and prepared supper for 6 stranded teamsters. Morrowglass Lodge remained open. That winter, Elowen learned what running the place alone truly required. She rose in darkness to break ice from the water barrels. She repaired the stable roof during a windstorm, balanced on a ladder while snow cut across the valley. She hauled feed, chopped wood, kept accounts, cooked meals, washed bedding, and sat beside travelers who coughed through the night. Bellweather Pass expected her to fail. Instead, she paid every debt. She replaced a broken sleigh. She negotiated a new flour price with the general store. When 2 freight companies tried to stop using the lodge because Vale had offered cheaper lodging near his mill, Elowen began sending daily weather reports to the drivers. After one Vale wagon lost 3 mules in an avalanche, and every Morrowglass team reached the pass safely, the freightmen returned. Still, rumors followed her. Some said she was too stubborn to admit defeat. Others said she had inherited money Ansel had hidden. A few suggested she had killed her own father to gain the lodge. Elowen listened to none of it. She had work to do. By January of 1884, winter had sealed the valley beneath 6 feet of snow. The temperature dropped so low that nails, split boards, and breath froze along the horses' whiskers. Bellweather Pass received no stagecoach for 11 days. The telegraph line went dead beneath fallen timber. Travelers disappeared from the road, and Morrowglass Lodge became a warm, isolated island beneath a sky as pale as iron. It was on the coldest morning of that winter that Elowen found Silas Vey. She had gone to check the warning bells along the southern trail. Ansel had designed the system years before, lengths of wire stretched between trees, connected to brass bells near the lodge. A trapped traveler could pull the line, and the sound would carry through the forest. No bell had rung. Elowen found Silas because ravens were circling above a stand of spruce. He lay half-covered by drifted snow beside a fallen horse. One glove was missing. Frost whitened his beard and lashes. A rifle remained strapped across his back, and one hand was clenched around the leather strap of a small pack. For a moment, Elowen thought he was dead. Then his chest moved. She knelt and pressed 2 fingers beneath his jaw. His pulse was slow but present. "Can you hear me?" she asked. His eyes opened a fraction. They were grey, unfocused, and filled with the instinctive suspicion of a hunted animal. He tried to reach for a revolver beneath his coat. Elowen caught his wrist. "You can freeze or you can threaten me," she said. "You do not have the strength for both." His lips moved. She leaned closer. "Horse," he whispered. The animal was dead. "I'll come back for the saddle." His fingers tightened around her sleeve. "The pack. I see it. Don't leave it. I am not leaving anything except your horse, and he has no objections." Silas tried to rise. His body failed him. Elowen rolled him onto a canvas rescue sheet she kept tied behind her saddle. She secured him with straps and dragged him toward the trail. He was taller than he first appeared, and heavy with wet wool, weapons, and ice. Each step sank above her knees. Halfway to the lodge, she stopped beneath a pine and breathed against the ache in her chest. Silas opened his eyes again. "Leave me," he murmured. Elowen pulled the straps tighter around her waist. "Be quiet. You'll kill yourself. Not before I kill you for making this difficult." Something like surprise passed across his face. Then he lost consciousness. She reached the lodge shortly before noon. For 3 days, Silas drifted between fever and silence. Frostbite had damaged 2 fingers on his left hand, but Elowen believed they could be saved. His ribs were bruised. A cut along his temple had frozen nearly shut, and an old scar crossed his right shoulder. He woke violently the first night. Elowen had been sitting beside the bed, sewing a torn blanket. One moment he was still. The next, he had grabbed her forearm and twisted, reaching for a knife that was no longer in his belt. She did not scream. She rose, used her weight to pin his wrist against the mattress, and waited until his eyes focused. "You're in Morrowglass Lodge," she said. "Your weapons are locked downstairs. You have a fever. You are not being held prisoner." He stared at her. "Who are you?" "Elowen Rusk." His grip loosened. "Where's my pack?" "Under the bed." His gaze shifted toward it. "I did not open it," she said. "Why not?" "Because it is not mine." Most people would have asked him who he was, where he came from, why he traveled alone in deadly weather, and what he carried so protectively. Elowen asked whether he wanted broth. Silas remained at Morrowglass because he could not yet leave. That was what he told himself. After a week, he could walk from the bedroom to the landing. After 2, he could split kindling one-handed. By the end of January, the frostbite was healing, his fever was gone, and the southern trail had reopened enough for a careful rider. Still, he remained. He repaired the broken latch on the pantry door without being asked. He cleared snow from the stable roof. When Elowen found him replacing rotten boards in the woodshed, she stood with her hands on her hips. "You are a guest. I have no money. You had $12 in your coat." His eyes narrowed. "You searched my pockets. I washed your clothes. Coins make a terrible sound in a laundry pot. I'll pay you. You nearly died on my trail. I did not carry you home to sell you a room." Silas drove another nail. "I don't take charity." "Then stop calling it charity. You split wood. I feed you. We are both spared an argument." He looked at her for a long moment. "You argue often?" "Only when someone is wrong." "And who decides that?" "I do. It saves time." The corner of his mouth moved. It was not quite a smile, but it was the first sign that he remembered how. Silas Vey had spent most of his adult life avoiding permanence. He had been born in Missouri, the older of 2 sons raised by a mother who took in sewing and a father who repaired wagons until whiskey made his hands unreliable. Silas learned early that promises were often another form of debt. At 17, he left home to work cattle drives. He trapped in Montana, guided survey crews through Wyoming, carried mail across winter trails, and spent one season prospecting in Colorado without finding enough gold to pay for his boots. His younger brother Merritt followed him west. Merritt was everything Silas was not. He talked easily, trusted quickly, and believed every new town contained a chance to begin again. He played the fiddle badly, laughed at his own jokes, and wrote letters to their mother even after she had been dead for 4 years, because, he said, someone ought to keep her informed. In 1880, the brothers worked security for a small mining camp near the Idaho border. The mine belonged to 6 partners who had discovered a modest silver vein and refused to sell to a larger company. One night, armed men attacked the camp. They wore no uniforms, but each carried a stamped brass token bearing a black mountain split by a silver line. The insignia of Vale Consolidated Mining. Silas and Merritt escaped into the timber. Merritt was wounded. Silas tried to carry him across a river before dawn, but the current was strong, the stones were slick, and men with rifles followed along the bank. Merritt died beneath a cedar tree before sunrise. Silas buried him with his own hands. He spent the next 3 years following rumors about Vale's operations. He found burned claims, missing records, frightened widows, and men who had been paid to forget. He also found that Orrin Vale rarely committed a crime himself. Others signed the papers, pulled the triggers, and carried the bodies. By the time Silas reached Bellweather Pass, he had stopped believing justice was anything more than revenge delayed by paperwork. He had been tracking one of Vale's former enforcers when his horse slipped on an icy ridge. The fall injured him, the storm erased the trail, and exhaustion did what bullets had failed to do. Then Elowen Rusk dragged him out of the snow. She did not ask for his history. That made him want to tell her. He did not. Instead, he watched her. Silas had known strong people. Men who could ride 3 days without rest. Women who crossed plains while burying children and driving wagons through mud. Soldiers who had survived battle only to collapse when they returned home. Elowen's strength was different. It was not loud. It did not announce itself. It appeared in the way she lifted a flour sack onto one shoulder and carried it from the storeroom without breaking conversation. It was in the care with which she checked every chimney before bed, the patience she showed frightened horses, and the absolute calm with which she handled problems that sent other people shouting. When the kitchen pipe froze, she did not curse the weather. She heated iron rods and thawed it section by section. When a trapper arrived with an infected hand, she cleaned the wound while he screamed insults at her. Afterward, she served him stew and informed him that pain did not improve his vocabulary. Silas also noticed how visitors looked at her. Some stared, some spoke slowly, assuming a large body must contain a slow mind. A merchant from Bellweather Pass arrived one afternoon to deliver lamp oil. He leaned against the counter and grinned while Elowen counted bottles. "Running short of help, Miss Rusk." "I have help." The merchant glanced toward Silas. "Him? Looks like he needs feeding more than hiring." Silas continued repairing a chair, though his jaw tightened. The merchant lowered his voice, as though sharing a kindness. "You ought to sell while Vale is interested. A place like this is heavy work for a woman, especially a woman built for comfort." Elowen finished counting. "You delivered 11 bottles, 12. One broke in the wagon. You covered the crate with straw and hoped I would not smell it." The merchant's grin faded. "You charging me for 12? That was the agreement. You can take 11 bottles back or leave all 12 and be paid for 11. You drive a hard bargain." "No, I count," the merchant muttered as he carried the broken bottle outside. Silas waited until the door closed. Built for comfort, Elowen stacked the oil. "He has a limited imagination. You should have thrown him out. He still had my receipt. I could have thrown him out after." She looked at him. "You are recovering poorly if you have enough energy to fight merchants. He insulted you. He revealed himself. That is less dangerous. Silas considered the difference. You always let people speak to you that way. No. What decides it? Whether answering would improve the situation. And if it would. Elowen lifted the final crate onto the shelf. Then I improve it. As February deepened, their days settled into a rhythm. Silas rose before dawn and found Elowen already in the kitchen. She brewed coffee strong enough to make him question his heartbeat. They ate eggs, biscuits, and whatever meat remained from supper. Then they worked. He repaired fences buried beneath snow. She managed stores and accounts. Together, they rebuilt a damaged footbridge over the creek. At night, they sat beside the hearth, where Elowen mended linens, and Silas carved pieces of ash into handles for tools. Conversation came slowly. Silas learned that Elowen disliked sweet coffee, admired well-made hinges, and could not sing a recognizable note. She learned that Silas hated sleeping with his back to a door, sharpened knives when troubled, and had once spent 6 months traveling with a medicine show because the owner needed someone to stop angry customers from overturning the wagon. "You sold false remedies?" she asked. "I stood near the wagon." "That is not an answer." The remedies were mostly alcohol and peppermint. Did they cure anyone? They improved the mood of funerals. She gave him a disapproving look. He smiled fully then. It changed his face. The first time Elowen saw it, she forgot what she had intended to say. Silas was not handsome in the polished way of men in advertisements. His nose had been broken at least once. A pale scar ran from his temple into his hairline. His beard grew unevenly near his jaw. But when he smiled, the years of suspicion fell away, and she saw the young man he might have been before grief trained him to expect loss. He did not smile often. Elowen found herself noticing when he did. In early March, Mayor Alden Price arrived with Marshal Corrin and 2 representatives from Vale Consolidated Mining. They rode into the valley under a clear sky, their horses struggling through softened snow. Elowen watched from the porch, while Silas stood inside the stable doorway. Mayor Price removed his hat. "Elowen, you are looking well. That makes one of us." Price's smile tightened. He was a narrow man with carefully trimmed whiskers and the habit of touching his vest whenever he lied. Marshal Corrin stood beside him, broad-bellied and red-faced, one hand resting near his holster. The company representatives wore black coats with silver mountain pins. Silas recognized the insignia immediately. His body became still. Elowen noticed. Price opened a leather case and removed several papers. "I have come on official business. I hoped we might discuss it privately. Silas works here." Price glanced toward him. "Since when?" "Since I hired him." Silas did not correct her. The mayor unfolded the documents. "These concern the ownership of the Upper Valley. A survey completed last autumn established that Morrowglass Lodge occupies land included in an earlier mineral grant." Elowen took the papers. "To whom?" "Orrin Vale." She read the first page. The language was formal, but the claim was simple. Vale asserted ownership of the land beneath the lodge and the northern ridge. According to the document, Ansell's original deed covered only the buildings and a small agricultural parcel. The remainder belonged to a mining grant filed in 1866, 2 years before Ansell arrived. Elowen turned to the final page. The territorial seal appeared genuine. Mayor Price's signature stood beneath it. So did Marshal Corrin's. Dr. Eamon Say had signed as witness. "You approved this?" she asked. The evidence was reviewed carefully. "By whom?" "Qualified officials." "You mean yourselves?" Corrin stepped forward. "Mind your tone." Elowen looked at him. "You are standing on my porch, carrying papers that claim my home belongs to another man. My tone is restrained." Price raised a calming hand. "No one wants conflict. Mr. Vale is prepared to compensate you generously. He will purchase the lodge, the structures, and all improvements for $8,000. It was more money than Elowen had ever possessed. It was also less than Morrowglass was worth, if silver lay beneath it. "I am not selling," Price sighed. "This is not truly a sale. The land grant is valid. Mr. Vale offers payment out of respect for your family's years here. My father challenged this claim before he died. The mayor touched his vest. Your father misunderstood the records. My father understood records better than you. Marshal Corrin's face darkened. Silas stepped out of the stable. Corrin looked at him. Who are you? Silas Vey. Never heard of you. That has protected us both. Corrin's hand shifted closer to his gun. Elowen moved between them. Price gathered the papers. You have 30 days to accept the offer. After that, Vale Consolidated will petition for removal. Tell Orrin Vale he can petition the mountain. Elowen, stubbornness is not a legal defense. No, evidence is. For the first time, Price's expression changed. Only slightly. Silas saw it. So did Elowen. The mayor placed a copy of the claim on the porch rail. 30 days. The men rode away. Elowen remained outside until they disappeared beyond the trees. Silas picked up the document. This seal could be real. It probably is. The claim? False. You sound certain. My father would never have built here without clear title. He carried copies of the deed whenever he traveled. Where are they? I don't know. Silas studied the silver mountain emblem stamped on the company page. I have seen this mark before. Elowen turned toward him. Where? He had avoided the story for weeks. Now the past had arrived at her door wearing Orrin Vale's insignia. Silas told her about the mining camp. He told her about the night of the attack, the river, and Merritt's death. He described the brass tokens carried by the gunman and the years spent following Vale's trail. Elowen listened without interrupting. When he finished, he expected suspicion, perhaps anger that he had hidden so much. Instead, she asked, Were you following Vale when I found you? One of his former men. I lost him outside Bellweather Pass. Did you come here because of my father? No. Did you know Vale wanted this valley? No. She looked down at the false claim. Then either the world is smaller than it seems, or men like Orrin Vale leave the same damage everywhere. Silas folded the paper. You should take the money. Elowen's head lifted. He will not stop because you refuse. He will use the court. If that fails, he will use Corrin. If that fails, he will hire men who do not carry papers. You think I do not know that? I think you know this valley. I know Vale. You knew the men he sent. I know what he is willing to do. Elowen stepped closer. And what do you intend? The question struck deeper than she knew. Silas looked toward the road where Price had disappeared. I intend to finish what I started. By killing him, if necessary. And then he stops. His company continues. Price remains mayor. Corrin remains marshal. Every document they forged remains in the land office. They will lose the man paying them. They will find another. Silas's voice hardened. You think records will stop them. I think truth in the right hands might. And if it does not, then we find better hands. He stared at her, frustrated by the calmness he had once admired. Elowen, your father tried to fight them with records. Yes, he died. The words hung between them. Her face changed, not with weakness, but with pain held under discipline. Do not use my father's death to make revenge sound like protection. Silas regretted the words immediately. Elowen, he believed evidence mattered. Perhaps that belief killed him, or perhaps it frightened Vale enough to have him killed. Either way, I will not honor my father by becoming the kind of person who murdered him. She took the papers and went inside. Silas remained on the porch. For years, vengeance had been the only purpose he trusted. It required no hope, only memory. It asked nothing of the future. Elowen had asked what came after. He had no answer. They began searching the lodge that evening. Ansel had hidden records before. During the fever season, he kept cash beneath a loose hearthstone because desperate travelers sometimes stole. He stored deeds in a tin box inside the grain bin. He once concealed a bottle of good whiskey in a hollow bedpost for 7 years, then forgot which one. Elowen and Silas searched every room. They removed drawers, opened walls, inspected floorboards, and climbed into the rafters. They found old receipts, unpaid bills, letters from travelers, and $3 silver wrapped in a sock. They did not find the deed. Days passed. The 30-day deadline became 24, then 20. Vey's pressure increased. Suppliers in Bellweather Pass suddenly refused Elowen credit. A freight company cancelled its spring contract. Someone cut the telegraph line leading from the lodge, though the snow showed no tracks by the time Silas inspected it. Dr. Elowen Say visited under the pretense of concern. He arrived alone in a small sleigh, carrying a medical bag and wearing a fur hat too large for his narrow head. "I heard you have taken in a stranger," he said. "I often do. This one has remained. He works here." Dr. Say glanced toward Silas, who was splitting logs near the woodshed. "Men who wander alone sometimes bring trouble. Men who arrive with warnings often bring more." The doctor gave a thin smile. "I also wish to speak about your health." "My health? You have been under great strain since Ansel's passing. I sleep well and eat regularly. Grief can produce fixation, distrust, an inability to accept reasonable facts." Elowen understood. "You intend to declare me unfit?" Saye blinked. "I said nothing of the kind. You signed Vey's claim as a witness. If I challenge it, you will say sorrow has affected my judgment. I am attempting to help. No, you are measuring the size of the cage before you build it." His expression cooled. "You are an unmarried woman living alone in a remote place." "I am not alone." The doctor looked at Silas again. "That may not improve appearances." Elowen stepped forward until Sai had to tilt his head back to meet her eyes. "My father trusted you when your practice was failing. He housed your family without payment during the smallpox winter. You signed the paper that may steal his home from me. Do not insult him further by pretending concern." Saye tightened his grip on his medical bag. "You should consider Mr. Vey's offer. Leave." He left. Silas watched the sleigh disappear. "He knows something. He knows many things. Then let me persuade him to share." "No, I did not say how. You did not need to." That evening, Silas found Elowen sitting alone in Ansel's room. The space had remained almost untouched since his death. His boots stood beneath the bed. A wool coat hung beside the door. The faint smell of cedar shavings lingered in the chest. Elowen held an old carpenter's square. "He used this to build the first roof," she said. Silas leaned against the doorframe. "He teach you his trade? Everything except patience. You seem patient. I am quiet." People confused the two. She ran her thumb along the worn wood. "He knew Vey was closing in. I should have made him tell me everything. He was trying to protect you. He trained me to run this place. Then, when danger came, he decided I could not bear the knowledge. Parents do that." "You sound certain." "My mother hid my father's drinking from us, though we lived in the same room." Elowen set the square on the bed. "Protection built on silence is still a kind of mistrust." Silas thought of the pack beneath his bed and the token inside it. He had kept Merritt's death from her until Vey forced the truth into the open. "You trusted me without knowing anything about me," he said. "I trusted that you were freezing. That is not the same." "No. Why didn't you ask?" She looked at him. "Because a person's past belongs to them until it threatens someone else. And now? Now your past is standing at my door." The words were direct, but not cruel. Silas entered the room. "I did not come here to use you. I know." "How?" "You would have lied better." He laughed softly. Elowen's expression gentled. Then Silas noticed something behind the carpenter's square. A narrow line in the wall paneling, almost hidden by shadow. He stepped closer. "What?" "This board has been removed." Elowen ran her fingers along the seam. Silas used a knife to pry the panel loose. Behind it lay a shallow recess containing a folded oilcloth packet. Elowen stopped breathing. Inside were letters, survey maps, receipts, and Ansel's original deed. The deed granted him full ownership of the valley, from the river bend to the northern ridge, including all mineral rights. It bore an official seal dated 1868. Vey's claim could not predate it, because Ansel's notes included a copy of the older 1866 grant. That document covered a different valley 12 miles east. Someone had altered the boundary description in the territorial archive. There was more. Ansel had collected evidence linking Vale to fraudulent claims across the region. He recorded payments from Vale Consolidated to Mayor Price. He had a letter from Dr. Say admitting that Vale pressured him to certify injuries and deaths as accidents. A statement from a former deputy described Marshal Corran moving a body after a mine collapse to conceal bullet wounds. At the bottom of the packet lay a small notebook. Elowen recognized her father's handwriting. The final pages described his confrontation with Vale. October 18th. Vale came after dark. Offered 10,000 for the valley. Increased to 15 when I refused. He knows silver lies beneath the North Foundation. Says refusal will bring consequences. October 21. Price claims my deed is defective. Corran advised me to leave the territory. Sai will not meet my eye. October 24th. I have sent copies to Judge Harlan in Dawson County, but the road may close. If anything happens to me, Elowen must find the compartment in the west wall. The final line was dated the day Ansel died. Riding to Bellweather Pass to meet a surveyor willing to testify. If I do not return, Orin Vale is responsible. Elowen sat on the floor. She did not cry immediately. She held the notebook with both hands, staring at the last line until the letters blurred. Then grief came, not as a dramatic collapse, but as a low sound pulled from someplace deeper than speech. Silas knelt beside her. She leaned into him. He held her while she wept for the father she had buried, for the questions she had carried, and for the certainty that Ansel had known he might die when he saddled his horse that morning. Silas did not tell her to be strong. She had been strong long enough. When the tears passed, Elowen wiped her face and looked at the papers. We take these to Dawson County. The judge may be bought. My father trusted him. Your father trusted Say once. Then we make copies. Silas nodded. We send them by different routes. Bellweather's telegraph is controlled by Price. The rail office at Summit Junction is independent. 40 miles through the pass. I can make it. The weather will turn. I have traveled worse. You nearly froze on my southern trail. That was poor timing. That was arrogance. He did not argue. Elowen gathered the papers. We go together. No. You have an irritating attachment to that word. Vale knows you matter. If we both leave, he takes the lodge. If you leave alone, he follows you. Then I lead him away. And if he kills you... Silas was silent. Elowen's voice lowered. You speak as though your life is a tool you no longer need. He looked toward the window. For a long time, it was. And now, outside, snow moved softly through the trees. The lodge settled around them with familiar creaks. A kettle hissed in the kitchen below. Silas met her gaze. Now I am less certain. They made 6 copies. Elowen sealed 2 in flour tins beneath the pantry. One went inside the false bottom of a wood box. Silas hid another beneath the stable trough. The originals remained in a leather case strapped beneath Elowen's clothing. They decided to send Silas to Summit Junction at first light with 2 copies. Elowen would remain at Morrowglass and prepare the lodge in case Vale moved sooner than expected. Vale moved that night. The first warning came from the eastern bell, one sharp ring, then silence. Silas rose from the chair beside the hearth. Elowen extinguished the nearest lamp. A second bell rang from the north trail. Not wind. Someone had touched both lines. Silas checked his rifle. They are testing the perimeter. How many? At least 2. Probably more. Elowen moved to the window. Snow had begun falling harder, thick flakes slanting beneath the wind. They will wait for the storm. Good cover. Bad retreat. Silas looked at her. What preparations did Ansel make? For weather or men? Tonight, both. Morrowglass Lodge had survived 16 mountain winters because Ansel built for failure. The main trail crossed a narrow slope where snow accumulated above a cutbank. In avalanche season, Elowen and Ansel used ropes to trigger small slides before the snow became dangerous. A release line still ran from the woodshed to the ridge. The stable had a secondary exit behind stacked hay. The lodge cellar connected to an old drainage tunnel leading toward the creek. Warning bells crossed 3 approaches. There were also traps, not deadly ones. Ansel disliked devices that could kill an innocent traveler. But years earlier, after thieves raided the smokehouse, he built concealed pits, weighted nets, and timber barriers that could be released across the road. Elowen knew every mechanism. Silas studied the valley map while she explained. "They will expect guns at the windows," he said. "Then we let them see guns at the windows." They placed spare hats and coats behind curtains. Silas tied cords to 2 rifles so they could fire remotely into the snowbank, creating the impression of defenders on the upper floor. Elowen moved supplies into the cellar: food, blankets, water, lanterns, medical bandages, and the evidence. "You have done this before," Silas said. "I prepared for storms. You prepared for siege. In winter, the distinction can be small." Near midnight, the bells stopped. That worried Silas more than ringing. He stood near the darkened window, watching the snowfall erase distance. A lantern appeared between the trees. 1 light became 3, then 6. Riders approached slowly along the main trail. Orin Vale came with them. Silas recognized him from descriptions before Elowen whispered his name. Vale sat tall in the saddle, wrapped in a black coat with a pale fur collar. His beard was silver at the edges. He looked less like a criminal than a banker attending a funeral. Marshal Corrin rode beside him. Behind them came 8 hired men. Vale stopped beyond the porch. "Elowen Rusk," he called. "I would prefer to settle this peacefully." Elowen opened the door but remained behind the frame. "You brought 9 armed men, 10, including the marshal. Then peace is badly outnumbered." Vale smiled. "I understand you found documents belonging to your father." Silas glanced at her. Someone had been watching the lodge. "You understand incorrectly," she said. "Ansel was secretive. He mistook suspicion for wisdom. He was suspicious of you. Then perhaps he possessed some wisdom after all." Vale's smile disappeared. Marshal Corrin raised his voice. "By authority of Bellweather Pass, we are here to remove stolen territorial records and arrest Silas Vey for questioning in connection with several violent crimes." Silas leaned toward Elowen. "Several? You have been busy." "Not recently." Vale dismounted. "The lodge is surrounded. The weather will worsen. No one is coming to help you." Elowen looked into the dark forest. "You assume help only comes from people." Vale stepped closer. "You are an intelligent woman. Your father's death was unfortunate, but it need not define yours." The calmness in his voice made Silas's hand tighten around the rifle. Elowen remained still. "You had him killed. I had nothing to do with his accident. He wrote your name the morning he died." That reached him. Only for an instant, but Silas saw Vale's eyes sharpen. Vale recovered. "Grieving men write many things. He also kept your payment records." Marshal Corrin looked toward Vale. There it was, uncertainty among conspirators. Elowen continued. "Copies have already left the valley. A lie, but a useful one." Vale studied the lodge. "Search it." The hired men advanced. Silas pulled the release cord. A rifle fired from the upper window. The shot struck a tree several feet from the lead man. He fell backward into the snow, shouting that someone was on the 2nd floor. Another rifle fired from the opposite side. Vale's men scattered for cover. Silas and Elowen moved through the cellar, exited the drainage tunnel, and emerged behind the smokehouse. Snow covered them almost immediately. 2 hired men circled the stable. Elowen pulled a wire concealed beneath the eaves. A weighted net dropped over both men, tangling their arms and weapons. They cursed and struggled. Silas stepped from behind the wall. "Stop moving!" One man reached for a knife. Elowen struck his wrist with a shovel handle. The knife fell. "I advised you to stop," Silas said. "You advised him softly. I was being polite." They removed the men's weapons and tied them inside the empty smokehouse. Gunfire cracked near the lodge. Vale's men shot at shadows in the upper windows. Elowen and Silas moved along a trench carved beside the stable. It led toward the western trees, where the old freight road narrowed between boulders. 3 men advanced through the pass. Silas waited until they crossed the marked stone. Elowen pulled another line. A timber barrier swung down behind them. A second dropped ahead. The men were trapped in a narrow corridor as snow slid from weighted branches overhead, burying them to the waist. They shouted and tried to climb free. Silas fired into the air. "Drop your weapons!" 2 obeyed. The third raised his rifle. Silas shot the stock from his hands. The man stared at the shattered wood. "Next one will be closer," Silas said. Elowen looked at him. "How much closer?" "He does not need measurements." They collected the weapons and left the men struggling in the snow, trapped but unharmed. 5 hired men remained with Vale and Corrin. The storm intensified. Visibility shrank to 20 yards. The wind carried voices in broken pieces. Vale shouted orders, but his men no longer moved with confidence. They had expected 1 woman and an injured drifter. Instead, the valley seemed to attack them from every direction. Silas knew fear could be more useful than ammunition. He rang the northern bell manually, then moved south. Elowen rang the eastern bell. The sound traveled through the storm. Vale's men turned toward noises they could not locate. One fired wildly. Another shouted that they were surrounded. Corrin cursed and ordered them forward. Then the stable door opened. The horses inside, frightened by gunfire, surged into the yard. Elowen had loosened their stalls and cleared the rear exit. The animals ran between Vale's men, forcing them apart. Silas tackled 1 gunman into the snow and struck him once behind the ear with the rifle stock. The man went limp. Another grabbed Elowen's coat from behind. He expected softness. He found leverage. Elowen lowered her center of gravity, caught his arm, and drove backward with the full force of her body. The man struck the stable wall hard enough to lose his breath. She twisted the revolver from his hand and pushed him face first into the snow. "Stay down." He stayed. Marshal Corrin appeared through the storm. His revolver pointed at Elowen. Silas raised his rifle, but Corrin stood too close. "Drop it, Vey." Silas lowered the barrel. Corrin grabbed Elowen by the collar and pulled her in front of him. "You should have taken the money," he said. Elowen's breathing remained steady. "You should have learned where people keep their knees." She drove her heel backward into his leg. Corrin cried out. Elowen turned, seized his gun wrist with both hands, and forced it upward as the revolver fired. The shot disappeared into the storm. Silas crossed the distance and struck Corrin across the jaw. The marshal fell. For one terrible moment, Silas stood over him with the rifle raised. Merritt's face returned from memory. The cedar tree, the river, the blood freezing black on his brother's coat. Corrin had helped men like Vale hide murder. Silas could end him. "Elowen!" Vale shouted. She turned. Vale stood near the woodshed with a pistol aimed at her chest. Everything stopped. Snow gathered on his shoulders. His face no longer held the mask of courtesy. "Call Vey off," he said. Silas slowly lowered his rifle from Corrin. Vale stepped closer. "You have caused enough trouble." Elowen's hands were empty. "You killed my father. He refused reason, so you admit it." "I admit he chose a foolish road on a dangerous morning." Silas shifted his weight. Vale aimed at him. "Do not." Elowen looked past Vale toward the woodshed wall. The avalanche release rope hung beneath the eaves. Vale noticed her glance. "What is that?" "A consequence." She lunged. Vale fired. Silas moved at the same moment. The bullet struck the edge of the woodshed door. Elowen grabbed the rope and pulled with both hands. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then a deep crack rolled across the ridge. Vale looked upward. The controlled slope above the main trail released. Snow moved through the trees in a low, gathering wave. It was not the catastrophic avalanche Vale imagined, but it was enough. Hundreds of tons of loose powder and broken crust swept across the road, knocking men from their feet and burying the lower trail beneath a wall of snow. Vale turned to run. Silas struck him from the side. They fell together. The pistol disappeared beneath the snow. Vale fought with surprising strength. He drove an elbow into Silas's injured ribs, rolled free, and drew a knife from his boot. Silas blocked the first strike. The second cut his sleeve. They struggled beside the woodshed, boots slipping, hands numb. Vale hissed, "You should have died with your brother." Silas froze. Vale smiled. It was the confession Rage had waited years to hear. "You remember Merit Vey?" Silas asked. "I remember every fool who refused an offer." Silas struck him. Once. Twice. Vale fell to his knees. Silas took the knife. Vale looked up and understood. The storm vanished from Silas's awareness. He saw only the man responsible for Merit, Ansel, and likely others whose names no one had recorded. Years of wandering narrowed into one motion. Silas raised the blade. "Elowen!" he heard. She stood several feet away. Blood darkened the sleeve where Vale's bullet had grazed her upper arm, but she remained upright. "Move," Silas said. "No. He killed them. I know. He will escape justice. Not tonight. You do not know that. No. I know what killing him will do to you." Silas's hand trembled. Vale breathed hard beneath him. "He deserves it," Silas said. "Yes." The answer surprised him. Elowen came closer. "He deserves every fear he caused, every lonely grave, every night someone waited for a man who never came home. Then let me finish it. If you kill him now, his death becomes the story. Price will call you a murderer. Corrin will call this an ambush. Say will declare Vale's confession the invention of a grieving criminal." Silas looked at Vale. "All these years. I know." "No, you do not." Elowen's eyes filled, but her voice did not break. "He murdered my father. Do not tell me I do not understand the hunger to hurt him." Silas lowered the knife slightly. She stepped close enough to take his wrist. "My father left evidence because he believed the truth could outlive him. Merit has only you. Let your brother have more than another body." Vale shifted beneath Silas. Elowen pressed the revolver she had taken from Corrin against Vale's shoulder. "Do not mistake mercy for weakness," she said. "Move again, and I will make your trial considerably less comfortable." Vale stopped. Silas looked at Elowen's hand around his wrist. Then he released the knife. It fell into the snow. They bound Vale and Corrin in the main room of the lodge. Of the hired men, 4 surrendered when they learned the trail was buried. 2 remained trapped in the timber corridor. 1 was unconscious. The others had fled into the forest before the avalanche, but the storm forced them back by dawn. Elowen treated injuries without distinction. She bandaged the hand of the man she had struck with the shovel. She set Corrin's knee in a splint. She cleaned the cut along Silas's ribs and wrapped her own arm after refusing his help twice. Vale sat near the hearth with his hands tied. "You believe paper will save you," he said. Elowen tightened the bandage around her arm. "No, people will. People can be purchased. Some, enough." Silas stood behind him. Vale glanced back. "You should have killed me when you had the chance." Silas's face remained unreadable. "I considered it." "You will regret restraint. Perhaps." Vale smiled faintly. "That is the difference between us. I never regret action." Elowen looked at him. "No, you fear consequence. That is why other men carried your guns." By morning, the storm had passed. The avalanche blocked the main road, but the old creek trail remained open. Elowen sent 2 surrendered gunmen to Bellweather Pass with a message for Judge Harlan and the county sheriff. She promised reduced statements against them if they delivered it. Neither man was loyal enough to Vale to refuse. 3 days later, riders entered the valley under a blue winter sky. Judge Harlan came with the Dawson County Sheriff, 6 deputies, a territorial investigator, and a clerk from the land office. Behind them rode 2 newspaper correspondents who had heard rumors of a siege and arrived faster than the law would have preferred. Mayor Alden Price tried to leave Bellweather Pass before they arrived. He was arrested at the southern toll road with 2 bags of cash and Vale consolidated bonds hidden beneath his wife's clothing trunk. Dr. Eamon Say confessed after the investigator presented Ansel's records. He admitted falsifying the report on Ansel's death and signing fraudulent land claims. He claimed Vale threatened his family, though his bank records showed repeated payments over 3 years. Marshal Corrin denied everything, until one of the hired men testified that Corrin had ordered the lodge burned after the papers were found. Orrin Vale remained silent. Then Judge Harlan produced a written account of Vale's confession during the fight, signed by Silas, Elowen, and 3 of Vale's own men. Vale called them liars. The investigator produced the altered land record. Vale claimed clerical error. Price's ledger showed payment dates matching the forgery. Vale blamed the mayor. Saye described how Ansell's body had been moved. Vale blamed Corrin. Corrin, realizing Vale intended to sacrifice him, gave a complete statement. The conspiracy collapsed in less than a week. The legal struggle lasted longer. Power rarely disappears because one man is arrested. Vale Consolidated had attorneys, investors, and political allies. They challenged Ansell's deed, attacked the witnesses, and claimed the siege had been an unlawful effort to resist a valid order. But Ansell had prepared carefully. Copies of his evidence existed in multiple places. The Territorial Archive confirmed that the boundary description had been altered. Judge Harlan found the original surveyor, now living in Nebraska. The man traveled west and testified that Vale's 1866 grant had never included Morrowglass Valley. The newspapers published every detail. Investors withdrew. Other families came forward with stories of stolen claims and suspicious accidents. A widow from Idaho identified the company tokens carried by the men who killed Merritt. A former Vale bookkeeper produced payroll entries for armed acquisition crews. By summer, Orrin Vale faced charges in 3 territories. Marshal Corrin was convicted of conspiracy, falsifying official records, and assisting in Elowen Rusk's murder. Dr. Say lost his license and received a reduced sentence in exchange for testimony. Alden Price was removed as mayor and convicted of fraud. Vale's trial took place the following spring. Elowen attended every day. Silas sat beside her. When the verdict was read, Orrin Vale did not look at the judge. He looked at Elowen. For years, he had relied on people being frightened of his name. She met his gaze without triumph. He had taken her father. He had tried to take her land. She would not give him the satisfaction of taking her peace. Vale was convicted. Morrowglass Valley remained hers. The silver beneath the northern ridge presented a different question. Mining companies sent offers within days. Some promised wealth beyond anything Elowen had imagined. Others spoke of development, rail access, jobs, and progress. Bellweather Pass urged her to accept. Merchants who had once mocked her began calling her Miss Rusk with exaggerated respect. Elowen refused every offer that required surrendering ownership. She did not oppose mining entirely. She opposed the belief that wealth beneath the earth entitled anyone to destroy what stood above it. With Judge Harlan's help, she formed a local company in which workers held shares. Extraction was limited to the northern slope, away from the river and lodge foundation. Waste could not be dumped into the water. Timber cutting required replanting. Families of injured workers received support from company profits. Some investors laughed at the terms. One did not. The mine opened 2 years later on Elowen's conditions. It made her wealthy. It did not change the hour she woke. Morrowglass Lodge continued to welcome travelers. Silas stayed through the trials because Elowen needed help. Then he stayed through summer because the stable required rebuilding. He stayed into autumn because she had ordered windows from Denver and someone had to install them. When winter returned, he claimed the northern trail was unsafe. Elowen did not point out that he had crossed worse trails alone for most of his life. They had grown comfortable with each other in ways neither knew how to name. Silas no longer slept with a weapon beneath his pillow. Elowen no longer ate supper alone. He repaired things before she noticed they were broken. She set coffee beside him when memories kept him awake. They argued about roof angles, horse feed, and whether his shirts were beyond mending. One evening in December, almost a year after she found him in the snow, Silas stood beside the hearth holding his old traveling pack. Elowen was preparing bread dough at the kitchen table. "You are leaving," she said. He looked at the pack. I thought about it. Her hands continued kneading. The northern trail is closed. I could take the river road. It washed out in September. I could wait until spring. That would be practical. Silas set the pack on a chair. I have never been accused of that. No. He watched her work. The kitchen was warm. Snow tapped softly against the window. A pot of stew simmered on the stove, and the lodge smelled of yeast, cedar smoke, and the cinnamon Elowen had added to dried apples. He had once believed home was merely a place where a man left belongings he could afford to lose. Morrowglass had changed the meaning. "What happens if I stay?" he asked. Elowen folded the dough. "You continue repairing things I intended to repair myself. And after that, there will always be more things." "Elowen," she stopped. Silas approached the table. "I do not know how to do this properly." "Do what?" "Remain." Her expression softened. "Most people begin by not leaving. I have tried that for a year. You have done reasonably well. I mean remain with you." The room became very quiet. Silas looked more nervous than he had while facing Vale's gunman. "I have no land," he said. "No family. No profession anyone respectable would name. I have spent most of my life moving before anyone could expect something from me. I expect many things from you. That is what concerns me." Elowen waited. "I cannot promise I will become easy company," he continued. "I wake angry. I disappear into myself. I sharpen knives when worried. You also leave wet boots near the stove. I could improve that." "I doubt it." A smile touched his face, then faded. "I can promise I will not lie about staying. I can promise I will work. I can promise that when the past comes looking, I will not let it turn me into someone you cannot trust." Elowen wiped flour from her hands. "You are making this sound like a business arrangement. I understand business arrangements. Then let us discuss terms." Silas swallowed. "What terms? You do not decide for me what dangers I can bear." "Agreed. You do not vanish to protect me." "Agreed. You speak before resentment turns you foolish." "That may require instruction. I am patient. You told me people confuse quietness with patience. In this case, I am making an exception." He stepped closer. "And your terms?" "I have one. Name it." Elowen looked into the face of the man she had pulled from the snow, the man who had arrived carrying vengeance like a second spine, and who had slowly learned that survival was not the same as living. "Remain because you want a life," she said, "not because you owe me one." Silas lifted a hand and touched her cheek. "I want this life." He kissed her gently. There was no audience, no music, and no grand declaration beyond the bread rising beside the hearth and the storm gathering harmlessly outside. Yet for both of them, it was the bravest promise either had made. They married in the spring. Bellweather Pass came to watch. Some attended from affection, some came from curiosity. Several arrived because Elowen now controlled a profitable mine and had become, in their estimation, suddenly worthy of respect. She understood the difference. She did not allow it to spoil the day. Elowen wore a dark green dress sewn by a widow whose husband worked at the new mine. The gown did not attempt to disguise her body. It followed the breadth of her shoulders, the fullness of her waist, and the strength of the woman inside it. Silas wore a black coat that fit badly because he refused 3 separate fittings. Judge Harlan performed the ceremony on the porch of Morrowglass Lodge. When he asked Silas whether he took Elowen as his wife, Silas answered before the question was finished. "I do." Elowen glanced at him. "You were instructed to wait." "I have waited most of my life." The guests laughed. Even Elowen did. Years later, travelers told stories about the winter siege at Morrowglass. With each telling, the avalanche grew larger, the hired men more numerous, and Elowen's traps more elaborate. Some claimed she lifted a man over her head and threw him through a wall. Others insisted Silas shot the flame from a lantern at 200 yards. Neither corrected the tales unless the storyteller became unbearable. The truth was less spectacular and more important. They survived because they knew the land. They survived because they prepared. They survived because frightened men working for money were less committed than two people defending a home. Most of all, they survived because Elowen refused to let hatred decide what justice should become. Morrowglass Lodge expanded over the next decade. A schoolroom was added for the children of miners and isolated ranchers. The stable doubled in size. A proper clinic opened after Elowen hired a young physician whose first promise was to treat patients rather than powerful men. The warning bells remained in the forest. Elowen inspected them every winter. Silas often accompanied her. On clear mornings, they climbed to the ridge above the lodge and looked down across the valley. Smoke rose from chimneys. Children crossed the footbridge. Wagons moved along roads that had once been little more than animal trails. Ansel's grave rested beneath a pine on the eastern rise. Merritt's name was carved into a stone beside it. Silas had resisted the idea at first. "My brother never saw this place," he said. Elowen stood beside him with one hand on the marker. "He led you here in his own way." Silas considered that. Then he placed a fiddle string beneath the stone because Merritt would have appreciated the gesture and complained about the instrument. In time, Silas spoke of his brother without leaving the room afterward. In time, Elowen remembered her father's laughter more easily than his body on the undertaker's table. Grief did not vanish. It changed shape. It became part of the foundation rather than the storm against the walls. One winter evening, many years after Vale's conviction, a young traveler arrived at the lodge during heavy snow. He was thin, frightened, and carrying everything he owned in a canvas bag. The shopkeeper in Bellweather Pass had refused him work because he looked too weak for the mines. Elowen served him stew. Silas gave him a bed. The next morning, the young man offered to split wood in exchange. "You are a guest," Elowen said. "I do not take charity." From across the room, Silas looked up from repairing a chair. Elowen glanced at him. He raised one eyebrow. She returned her attention to the traveler. "Then stop calling it charity," she said. "You split wood. I feed you. We are both spared an argument." Silas smiled. Outside, the warning bells moved gently in the mountain wind, ready to call through darkness whenever someone became lost. Inside, the fire burned steadily. The lesson of Morrowglass Lodge endured long after the silver was gone, and the old trails became roads. Strength was never measured by the shape of a body, the loudness of a voice, or the fear a person could inspire. True strength lived in endurance, preparation, compassion, and the courage to choose justice when revenge would be easier. A home was not merely land, timber, or stone. It was the place where people were seen clearly, where burdens were shared freely, and where no wounded soul was required to earn the right to be saved.